Hello, and welcome to Reach Live. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's an absolute pleasure at the end of each month to be hosting Reach Live. My name is Rina Sanga. I'm the head of digital and connected health at Ipsos. Ipsos are a global market research and insight agency. So we love data and we work specifically in healthcare. And one big part of my job is to look at new innovation. And we often see some fantastic work from startups. And that's the topic today. It's my absolute pleasure to have Sally here with us today from Microsoft. And I'll ask Sally to introduce herself and give you a sense of her role.
Great. Thank you, Rina. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So hello, everyone. My name is Sally Frank. I'm the worldwide lead for health and life sciences at Microsoft for Startups. And so I'm tasked with the ability to build a portfolio of high potential startups, as well as identifying products and services that can help our startups. And ultimately, our goal is to enable those startups to grow and scale faster than they possibly could do on their own. So that takes both a business component and a technology component, as you would expect. I've been in role since December, which is when this role was established as a focus on health and life sciences within the startup team. And prior to that was working in IoT for healthcare. And I've been at Microsoft for about 6 years and was prior with a Microsoft partner for 16 years. So I'm really proud to be here and look forward to the conversation with you, Rina.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Sally. Let's talk a bit more about the initiative. You say it's here to help startups, give them a platform, but also think about growth and scale. So what is it you look for? What's the kind of flavor of the type of work that you're doing? Give us a bit of a sense of that.
Sure. So the program itself is really designed to help organizations, whether they're at ideation, MVP, or product market fit stage. But where I focus my energy is really to help those that have achieved product market fit find their next customer. We do some vetting of their technical solutions to make sure that it's scalable and not brittle and it works for 5 customers or 5,000. And then we'll do some matching with our enterprise customers. One of the value propositions of working as a startup with Microsoft is that in healthcare especially, you go into any healthcare organization and Microsoft may have a small footprint, but there's a footprint there. And there's a team responsible for working with that account. So we leverage not only the connections that the startups have themselves, but the startups leverage our connections with both our end customers and our vast partner ecosystem, which can also be a great source of distribution channels or collaboration.
Fantastic. In terms of what you've seen in terms of the startups that come and the kind of, with it must be such energy, right? Because you're at that beginning stage where they've got passion and a problem to solve and they're coming to you. And I know it's tough, right? Sometimes people come and they have a baby. They basically had something that they've nurtured for so long. And then you have to kind of stress test it. So tell me a little bit about how that is, the different kind of groups of people that you meet and the energy that you see, but also what are some of the challenges of the role?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because we do get really excited about what we see and what some of the startups are doing. But everything has to have a value proposition. And so when we're working with startups, usually in the earlier stages, ideation, MVP, helping them articulate what that value proposition is really important. I was talking with other consultants this week that focus on startups. And one of the things that I think is really important is making sure that the startups have this mindset where they're not just focused on the product and their solution, but that they build a product roadmap, they build a go-to-market strategy and a regulatory approach all at the same time. Because what we feel like is that we see these startups get super excited about what they're doing, as they should, and they see, that they have a pathway to doing something better, cheaper, faster. But they may get so wrapped up in the technology that when it's done, they've not consulted a focus group, or even friends of the firm that might have insight that's valuable, or they haven't looked at the regulatory requirements that they have. So we're really trying to impress upon startups at an early stage, especially in health and life sciences, where it's so important to have security and secure that PHI, that we're trying to drive home the point and give them access to resources that can help across those three areas.
No, it's so on point what you say. You know, every element of that has to be in the planning from the beginning. And we had a great talk with one of our other Reach Live sessions with Anna Kravitz, who is now also is running her own startup and producing tech. And she goes, in digital health, the digital is such a small part of it. You know, the tech is such a small part of the entire piece, because to really land something, it's all those other elements. It's the operational elements. It's how you're going to use the data, and how you're going to inform your strategy. What surprises do you feel startups have once they come into the fold and they start to have the support to learn these different things? What have been some of the surprising moments for them from your experience?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is most surprising is most folks, whether they're startups or otherwise, don't know how involved Microsoft is with healthcare. And it becomes really interesting when I talk to someone and they go, "Oh, you have a whole team that's focused on healthcare and startups?" It's like, yes, we do. And so I think that's number one. And part of that is because our go-to-market strategy in healthcare and across the board is to put our customers first and to tell their stories. And if you remember the old Intel marketing approach, which was powered by Intel, where they would tell their customer stories, we kind of do the same. It's like powered by Microsoft. And so that becomes one of the areas of surprises. And I think the other part is probably some of the tools that we have that the startups can use to accelerate the development of their solution. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Within our Dynamics product, we have a patient engagement module, which, you know, if you're doing anything with patients, you're thinking, I need that. Well, you don't have to build it. We have one that you can customize and take that development time down to a lot less than you otherwise would. Same thing with like our API for Fire and some of these other, specifically even our Microsoft Cloud for Healthcare, which is designed to provide an infrastructure that you can easily build upon, whether you're a startup or an end customer. So I think this vast array of accelerators and templates that sit on our flagship products are probably one of the biggest surprises, and a happy surprise for our startups, and being able to take advantage of those to accelerate their development.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. Let's talk about go-to-market. It's such a hot topic because it's where all the, there's a huge amount of failure in digital health, and that's because of go-to-market. What strategies we deploy, how much sustaining power we give them, and anyone who works now in healthcare understands the difficulties of that. What have been some of the go-to-market challenges that you're aware of and mindful of as you think about that for the startups?
Well, so keep in mind that I took this role in December of 2020, and we're still in the same pandemic. So I think there's both challenges and opportunities, frankly, that came as a result of COVID. And when I think about the opportunities that have come up through COVID or because of COVID, it all revolves around the telehealth and the virtual visits and things like that, which is great. But on the other side, a lot of our providers are frankly overwhelmed with those problems that come with COVID. And so the idea of taking on an additional opportunity or an additional project to try and innovate in certain areas just becomes overwhelming with dealing with COVID as well. So we're now looking at, as we start to get to the point where we are hopefully seeing at least improvements in COVID and treatments and everything, hopefully we'll be able as an industry to turn our attention over to these innovations that we're working on today. I mean, we are getting some traction. I'm not saying it's completely dead, but things have been put off more frequently than they would otherwise.
Yeah, which is understandable, with the pandemic and what's going on and all the other things that are out there and things. Fragmentation is another factor, right, with the health system. So, that can be really tough. So I know you've got perspective on that. So how do we deal with such fragmentation?
Well, it's interesting because I have startups from countries that have a single unified health system, and they are eager to come to the US because of the fragmentation. It's almost like there's a perception that there are more opportunities because there are all these little pockets going on of activity. So it is interesting from that perspective. But one of the things that I think is overlooked, and this point was driven home in a webinar that I listened to that Dr. Joe Kveter was talking about, who's a leader in connected health. He talked about not only is the fragmentation in terms of implementation, but we also have to look at the fragmented way that we're going to pay for these things. And how do we ensure that these digital health innovations actually have someone who's going to pay? And, we can't lop it all on the patients because that doesn't seem reasonable. And so we really need to think in terms of the trifecta of the patient, the provider, and the payer, which in the US and other areas is not the same, but in other areas it is the same, but it's still different organizations within that. So making sure that we have the understanding of who's going to pay and set up the solution in a way that it works for all three of those parties is really important.
So let's talk about some of these pilots that you've done and some of the work that you've done, and a lot of it is available, I know, in terms of public domain, which is fantastic. But yeah, give us a sense of what type of pilots have been happening.
So I've got a few that I'll share, and you'll have to stop me because I could talk about these all day because I get really excited about them. But the first one I'll talk about is a company out of Pakistan, Sehat Kahani, and it was established by two female physicians. And their vision was to take the other female medical students who, for some reason or another, maybe never got to actually practice. They finished school, but maybe family pressures or something else prevented them from practicing. And there was also a lack of women's health initiatives. So what they did was they started by pairing medical school graduates with women who needed medical care. And it started in kind of this community type of way. And then they went to the point of building kiosks, and now they have their own clinics. And so it's just such a wonderful story of building an infrastructure to help those that didn't have proper health care before, and taking advantage of this tremendous resource and building a business around it to help people. So the health equity approach of that is really very compelling. So that's one. We've got another partner coming out of Singapore called Halza, Halza, and really a great team there. And they have focused on a couple of different areas, but the one I want to share today is focusing on providing patients through their providers a way to manage their own health records. Now, we're doing this a little bit, but they've taken it to the next level where it's a mobile app. And if you are a family unit and you are the mother or the father, you have access to everyone's health records in your family, obviously guidance given on and HIPAA and GDPR and those types of things. But the idea is that if in the case that they mentioned in one of their case studies, is that there was a gentleman in Indonesia who was a cardiac patient, but his doctor was actually in Singapore. And there was an emergency kind of situation, and he and his family could look at his records, share that with the doctor right there in Indonesia, and then they could loop in the doctor from Singapore. So it was such a great way to show how you can not only put the patient in more control, but also provide much better collaboration, in this case, across countries.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, super cool.
And personal health information in particular is so interesting. I remember doing work in Indonesia itself, and it's a very fragmented personal record. Like the EMRs have not been implemented at scale at all. So there was a big drive to have the individual hold their health records so that they could go and get the help they need at different points. So like a really clear problem to be solved and a great solution to then kind of take that forward.
Yes.
The compliance factor is one that you touched upon, regulatory framework and how important it is. What kind of things do you put in place there, for the startups? Because there's a lot to, someone may have a fantastic idea. There's a lot to get your head around when it comes to compliance and regulation.
Yeah, it is. And so I'll kind of start at the macro view. So from a macro perspective, in August, we announced that we're spending $20 billion over the next 5 years in cybersecurity research and development. And so while we typically don't think in terms of cybersecurity from a patient perspective, we do have to think about cybersecurity and the ransom attacks and all that from a provider and payer and from an organizational perspective. So there's that kind of big investment. But in addition, we have a variety of tools that, again, kind of sit on our flagship products. Our cloud is HIPAA compliant, GDPR compliant. So that takes care of the data once it's in the cloud. But we're also providing tools and accelerators and security products for things, for the data as it's in transit. So you think about the API for FHIR and the security that comes with that. You think about our Azure Sphere MCU that can sit in medical devices and provide added security. So there's a lot of things, even the compliance with FHIR and HL7 and taking text and analyzing it so that it becomes FHIR compliant, through that process. These are all things that we bring to our startups and to our ecosystem, and we're constantly innovating in those areas and continually adding to the capabilities and additional products that we bring.
I know compliance in healthcare is a bugbear for many people, but it is there to protect ultimately. And I think, regulatory folk get a lot of flack on some of these talks where we want to talk about innovation and new things, but actually management of data in particular is going to be, it's a top priority. And the companies that put data privacy at the top are the ones that are actually going to succeed. I think that's kind of what we're seeing consistently through all the work that we do at Ipsos on our trends framework as well. Data privacy and sustainability are really two big drivers around what people are expecting from their companies.
Yeah, one of the things that we see, whether we're working within startups or elsewhere, is that there may be folks, clinicians, staff people who see an opportunity to innovate, want to go after a solution, and then the CISO and the IT folks will go, whoa, time out. Let's take a look. Let's do a security assessment. We have a HIPAA and GDPR Azure Blueprint that folks can use, secure system checklists and things like that, so that when a person in a provider or payer is interested in doing something innovative, the startup or the partner organization can say, wait, we did this evaluation. We encourage you to do your own, but here's where we started.
Yeah, and that's a kind of, that kind of coherency is where I've seen to be the transformation from tech being spoken about last 5 to 6 years. There's a lot more systems, a lot more frameworks in place, and I think a lot more collaboration that I think is key, right? So I think cross-industry collaboration is something which I think is just going to prosper more and more. What would be some of the things that coming into healthcare, because previously, before you joined Microsoft and before you've taken on this role, you've had a diverse career. It wasn't just healthcare. What to you have been the things that have struck you about working in the healthcare field? What stood out for you?
So I will tell you that when I started working in healthcare, I took an opportunity to take a role in Microsoft, and they said, "What do you know about healthcare?" And I said, "I know how to be a patient." And while that doesn't seem to be very helpful, sometimes it can be helpful to put yourself in the role of the patient. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes down to it, I started in healthcare doing IoT. So connected product, connected factory, connected medical devices, remote patient monitoring, all these things that are really interesting and impactful. And it came from my work with IoT and manufacturing, which I also thought was really cool. But once you see how the technology can not only influence how care is delivered, but influence outcomes and influence how we look at providing care, whether you're thinking about how do we improve clinical trials so that we get medications to patients faster, better, and more vetted, or we're looking at actual point of care solutions. It's all about the patient. It's all about, improving their outcomes and improving their health. And the thing that I like most is that we're now moving, I think, as an industry from this whole, reactive care mode into preemptive care, proactive care, wellness. And so while we look at the things like the Apple Watch and we go, okay, it's not medical grade, but it is an early indicator, can be an early indicator. You can certainly track your wellness that way, which is, if you're doing a good job at that, hopefully you'll have fewer complications down the line. So I think this whole shift from how do we treat the sick, which is terribly important, but also backing up and going, how do we keep people healthy? How do we keep people informed about their own health? I think that's where the additional charge of working with startups and seeing how they're taking these trends and really manifesting them into solutions that we can all use.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the big call to action here. When we know better, we do better. But it's not enough, right? The other thing that we have to be mindful of is knowing what we should do hasn't always resulted in results. There's many other complex factors that influence health, and activating it, right? Getting into market, getting something to happen it's a lot more, right? It's not just in front of someone. It's like, how do we make it a part of their life? Have it, live and breathe.
Yeah, which is really an interesting point, because one of the things that we're beginning to see, especially within our startup teams, is the nudging, apps that have nudges, and because we know that you might have an Apple Watch and 3 months into it, you forget to use it, or you forget to turn it on when you exercise, whatever. There's a time where the diminishing interest begin to affect how well you're adhering to anything, whether it's a medication or an exercise or anything else. So this idea of engagement in a way where it's gamified, or you get nudged, or some other incentive to keep you engaged, interested, and acting in a positive way for your health is kind of the next hurdle we're dealing with today.
Yeah. And it's such an exciting one, because it involves behavioral scientists, psychologists, nutritionists, and tech folk, and doctors. So it is a real team effort. For those that want to join the program, that become part of what you do, how do they do that?
So we'll put a link in the chat where you can learn more about the Microsoft for Startups program. We are in for a refresh in next month. So look at it today, read all you like, and get all the information. But come back in another month, and it'll be completely different, and expanded coverage and additional tools that you'll be able to use. So we too act like a startup from time to time, and reinvent ourselves and try new things and pilot new ways to work with our startups. So we've been doing some really interesting work over the last several years, and the culmination of that is coming to the fore in October, where we'll relaunch. So we'll hope everyone will come back and check that out as well.
Absolutely. We'll make sure everyone that's attended will get a link to that. And for those that are watching it on demand, you'll get the slickness of seeing it on the screen. So that'll be lovely. What we're coming close to closing. We've got a few minutes left. What's your call to action to the tech industry? As someone who's really right at it, and looking at all this inspired work and, trying to harness that passion for something that will drive change, what do you want the tech industry to be doing?
So I think the tech industry needs to, it goes back kind of to what we were talking about before, is there are times when technology is implemented or evaluated for technology's sake because it's really cool. And I think that as an industry, we need to remember that there are patients, there are users, there are other stakeholders involved. We think about the care circle, or thinking in terms about the care circle for a patient that includes family members, friends, as well as the clinicians and staff. So I think we need to do a better job in connecting with those people to understand what works. If I see another separate dashboard for a single solution, it happens all the time, which is great, and they're really interesting. But how is a clinician going to look at this dashboard for this, that dashboard for that? We need to think in terms of this ecosystem and really helping not only the patients, but the practitioners get away from alarm fatigue, help them with, the massive burden that they're under today, and really think in terms of the users as well as the other stakeholders. So not implementing technology for technology's sake, making sure that the compliance component is built in, the security component is built in, and then working with a group of advisors to make sure that what you're putting together is not only compliant, but is usable in the context of that person's everyday work life.
So spot on. For me, mapping the true journey of from a clinician's perspective, their workflow and what they deal with, and from a patient or user perspective, their day-to-day life, their highs and lows, and their context and their environment is so key. So that's a fantastic call to action that we need to do more of. Just a few things as I wrap up. HLTH Health Conference is up and coming for those who can travel and be there, or be there virtually. And I know Microsoft Startups will be there, and the Reach team will be there too. So that's happening at the end of October. There's also another exciting event happening in lovely Dublin in Ireland on December the 2nd and 3rd, for those that can travel there. It's the 3rd annual Virtual Reality and Healthcare Europe Symposium, run by IVHRA and Reach. So, but in short, it's a fantastic VR conference. So that would be another one to register. We'll be circulating the relevant information to everyone that's registered and attended today. I've had notice that there's been some technical difficulties, and we apologize for that, for those that have been live, and we will address that. But the priority today has been listening to Sally. Sally, it's been wonderful. I really, really find the work you do so wonderful, and your spirit that you bring to your job as well. Fantastic. Any final thoughts as we close?
No, Rena, just thank you for this time. And it was lovely chatting with you today. And for those of you out there that may be innovating, keep it up, and let us know how Microsoft can help. We'd love to work with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending, and we will speak to you soon. See you at another Reach Live.